Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry, and as always, this is my co-host.
I am Chris Huddleston.
And today, we are going to be talking about a delightful little humdinger that you're going to want to sit down and watch with your Auntie June, Bone Tomahawk.
Lean back. Head right there. Bracing. This is going to penetrate.
Good evening. In civilized towns, you look a man direct in the face when you talk to him.
This isn't comfortable.
Well, it's not supposed to be.
There's a situation. Serious.
Mrs. O'Dwyer was abducted.
She is my everything, and those savages have got her. God knows what they're doing to her, and every second that we delay.
You know who did this? They don't have a name. How many of them do you think there are?
It won't matter. You have no chance against any number of them.
I'm coming with you.
No, I need you here.
And this is what a backup's for, to help an emergency, not stay back. I'm coming.
We're making a 5-day journey in 3 days, riding along and sleeping the bare minimum.
I don't know what's west of here. No cattle trail or anything else goes in that direction.
If our horses die before we get there, or we go into hostile territory, weak and foggy with exhaustion, we won't rescue anybody.
Don't be scared. I am a friend.
You aren't.
Damn you!
You had no cause. If you want to question my morals, do it later.
Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts, which we are about to receive.
Ambush!
Okay, so that trailer, A, is a little bit long, and B, it's a little hard to get, just from what you're listening to, what's going on. But it is what it is. Chris, do you have a synopsis for us?
I do, and I wanted to give a spoiler warning right up front. If this is a movie that I feel like the less you know, the better going into this. All you really need to know is it's a Western with Kurt Russell. It's funny. It's also brutally violent. And so if that sounds like something that is up your alley and you have not seen it, go ahead and watch it before you listen to our show. But the movie is written and directed by S. Craig Zoller. It stars Kurt Russell, Patrick Wilson, Matthew Fox, and others. And the brief synopsis is: in the dying days of the Old West, an elderly sheriff and his posse set out to rescue their town's doctor from cannibalistic cave dwellers.
And it's fun, alliterative,
Cannibalistic cave dwellers.
Cannibalistic cave dwellers.
I like it,
so,
yeah.
I thought that I had seen this one before, and I honestly, now that I've watched it all the way through, there's enough in it that I didn't remember, that maybe I just saw some of it, or maybe I never got all the way through. But you had definitely not seen it before.
I had definitely not seen it, no.
So we'll start with you.
Okay.
What did you think?
So this was a bit of a surprise for me. I was aware of this movie. This came out in 2015. It had a lot of buzz at the time of its release. I remember it making a lot of top 10 lists that year, and a lot of top 10 horror lists that year. Now you might say this is a Western, which it is very much a Western, but there's also a big horror element to this. I I had always wanted to see this movie, but I kind of resisted it some, I think, because I thought this was going to be a slow burn, very dour, grim kind of a movie, and it's not really. It's not fast paced. There isn't tons and tons of action in this, and major parts of this are just dialogue, just these men talking. But it's funny. I mean, some of the funniest dialogue that I've heard in a while. I watched this by myself, and I don't know about you, but I was laughing out loud at a lot of the lines in this.
That might have just been you.
Oh, okay. You didn't. Okay. Well,
we'll talk about
that.
about it.
But it's very. I think it's kind of Coen Brothers like dialogue. I really liked so it's basically what happens is it has Patrick Wilson is one of the characters, and his wife is a doctor. She is abducted by these basically cavemen who they refer to as troglodytes. She's abducted, and then Kurt Russell, Matthew Fox, Richard Jenkins, Patrick Wilson create their own posse to go and hunt these people down and get back Patrick Wilson's wife. And so basically most of the movie is them traveling the several miles to encounter these people. And then there's a big showdown at the end. But I really, really liked it. It was, like I say, it was not exactly what I thought it was going to be. It's dark. I mean, there are some scenes in this that are as disturbing as anything I've seen in a long time.
Yeah.
So definitely this is not one for the squeamish. And kind of like you said, you don't want to watch this with your auntie or, your grandparents or whatever. I think a lot of traditional Western fans maybe would be turned off by this because it is so graphic, but I really loved it. I thought this was an extremely well written and directed movie. So
I agree.
What did you think?
Yeah, I agree. I want to talk a little bit about the violence. We'll just get right to it because I think it stands up as a Western hands down.
Sure.
Unquestionably. People say, "Oh, I thought it was a Western." It is absolutely a Western, and I think as Westerns go, it's a good Western. But it is also definitely a horror movie, and the graphic. I mean, it's dismemberment, really. It's cannibalism,
and it's unflinching. I mean,
the camera does not look away.
No,
it is. I made sounds out loud during the scene. I'm sure you know.
I'm a big horror. I was
like, oh god, oh my god. I was really like, oh gee, oh. It was like, oof.
I'm
really
a big
rough.
horror fan, and there were a couple of times where I was borderline like, oh, maybe I'm gonna have to turn my head.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal. But I will say, you're like, well, maybe these guys are just wimps and it's a Western and they can't take it. No, if you listen to the sound design throughout the film, it's very much in the realm of horror. No Silverado sweeping John Ford soundtrack, no trumpet driven background music as they gallop across the plains. No, they limp. The one guy's got a wound on his leg, and they end up losing the horse as part of the way for reasons, and then they have to walk it. So it's plodding and grinding, and the whole time throughout the movie, it's not that there's just the instance of violence. The hook at the beginning, the opening scene, is two robbers who have basically come upon a band of cowboys sleeping, and I took it as sort of murdered them in their sleep. Got snuck up on them and killed them to take their stuff and steal their boots, and that's a rough scene too. Like the camera just watches this, these two guys murder these people, or the tail end of it, and that sort of sets the tone for the whole film. So when people say, "Oh, I've killed a bunch of Indians," or Yeah, he got killed. You have in your mind what one person killing another person with a knife or shooting them point blank looks like, including their agonizing death. Um, and so I think it is a Western first, but you can't parenthesize horror too much because of where it's going as a film. And where it's going as a film is into these cave dwellers' cave. So the two guys in the beginning somehow they're in the country of these cannibal. I guess they're native originally. They're sort of monstrous too because they have these sort of bone whistles embedded in their neck, and that was a technicality I wanted to talk to you about. Like, how in the heck, they weren't born with it.
Yeah.
How in the heck did they get those things? So they don't talk. They make this sort of whistling, monstrous cry. They do a big inhale and then they sort of roar, and it's this sort of almost out of Star Wars. It's this sort of screaming whistle that everyone, has a, spine shiver down your spine response to. And we know this because one of the guys kills one of them and cuts it out of his throat and uses it, goes around blowing it to sort of trick them into thinking that, they're sort of quote unquote talking to each other across the hills.
Yeah.
So there's a few, if you pick at it too hard, it kind of, you say, okay, well, you're thinking about it too hard. There's these monstrous guys that live up in the hills, right? They're not supernatural. They're just utterly without empathy or remorse, and they're cannibals. And so one of the two guys that we see murder the others in the beginning, they get one of them, and the other one takes off, and he comes into town, and they follow him into town, right? They track him into town. And the wife of, I guess, the main character, Kurt Russell's really the main character, but I guess the wife of the main guy is a doctor, and she goes to tend to a wound in the guy's shin or foot. And while she's doing that, these cannibal natives show up, having tracked the guy, and they abduct the young deputy who's left there, her, and the original guy from the beginning. And so it's not like they just appear out of nowhere. They follow this guy into town because it's a 5-day ride, we're told. Oh wait, no, I remember where I was going with that. Where I was going with that is where we're going. So now that this guy's wife is abducted, we got to go get her. And so they put together a group of people. There's 4 of them?
Yes.
To go track her down. And then the whole body of the movie is them on this trip to get there. And eventually we get there. So when we get there, they get caught and they're sort of put up in these cages. These, it's up in a cave. So they've fashioned these sort of cages, and they say they get there and there's just the woman and the deputy. And they're in cages on the other side of the room, and they go, what happened to, the first guy? And she goes, they ate him. And then, so eventually they come in and they drag the deputy out and they scalp him, right? The first thing to do is scalp him. Then they stuff the scalp in his mouth, and they take like a stake and they drive the stake into the back of his throat. They kind of nail the scalp back in his mouth. I don't know if that was just to be cruel, or if it's a ceremonial thing, or if they were tired of his yowling.
Who knows?
What, because he's screaming his head off. They strip him naked, and this guy's he's not begging for his life. He's just telling the sheriff, tell I forget exactly what he says.
Sure.
He's like, tell my wife or tell my mom or whatever that, and everybody's just, including us, is just sitting there captive watching this. And then they scalp him, and then they jam this stake down his throat, which is horrible. And then they flip him around, and they hold him up by his legs, and he's screaming the whole time. They take one of these big bone tomahawks and they whack away at him right in the groin. They split him right down the middle, and they pull him apart, and all his innards come tumbling out.
Yeah.
And this is all one big shot. Like, we're just watching this. It is
not cutting away.
It's horrible.
Yeah, it's pretty gnarly.
It is just like I could still see it against the back of my eyelids.
Mhm.
Oh, God Almighty! And then, so if we had any illusions of like, oh well, they're gonna ride in there and they're gonna pull off some neat trick shots, and they're no. Now you see like what they've been heading towards this whole movie. So it is clearly a horror. You don't go into a movie not into that. You don't say maybe we should show this. You go into it with planning to show that, and
Right.
so it's definitely a horror movie. And they thought, what if we made it a Western too?
Mhm.
That was a long monologue, but I do. There is the character development is great, and there is comedy in it. I didn't mean to say it's not funny, but given the tone and cannibalism and everything else, I was
Oh
not
yeah, I didn't want to.
cracking up.
Sure,
There
sure.
weren't jokes. It's just
Yeah,
people.
it was not jokes and not slapstick comedy or anything like that, but just this funny banter between these men that I just thought was really well written. And I was looking through IMDb. I should have taken notes of some of the quotes because I just felt like there were some really great lines, and they don't really have any of them on the IMDb page. But
Yeah.
you have so it's Kurt Russell is the sheriff, and he's this. It was really interesting how they played the characters. I felt because Kurt Russell is the sheriff, and then you had Richard Jenkins, who was one of his deputies, and Richard Jenkins is they're these two old guys, and Richard Jenkins is kind of this goofy, not particularly bright man who just never stops talking. And I kept waiting for them to be a point in the movie where Kurt Russell would just explode and start yelling at him, just be like, shut up. And he never did. And I thought that was kind of refreshing because I kept waiting I was kind of thinking of comparing him to the sheriff that John Cleese played in the last movie that we watched, Silverado, who was, the guy who he didn't want strangers coming into his town, and he was just this no nonsense, basically. I don't like strangers because they cause problems. And Kurt Russell is a bit like that as well. It's not necessarily that he's totally against strangers, but the stranger who does wander into the town, David Arquette, he has good reason to be wary of him because he's a really bad guy. But I kept waiting for them to maybe be a scene where Kurt Russell would snap and you'd be like, oh, this guy's really a psycho, and there never was that. He was a man who was capable of violence because he had to be capable of it, living
Right.
in the Old West. But still, you never got the feeling that he was anything other than a decent man. Like I
Right.
say, he treats this, this deputy who's not this particularly bright guy very well. And then you have the other two men. You have Patrick Wilson, who's the husband of the woman who was abducted, and then you have Matthew Fox, who's this kind of cocky guy, and he brags about the Indians that he's killed and everything. But I thought it was refreshing. Like, I watched some other movie, tried to a couple of weeks ago, and I don't even remember what it was, but it was some movie where these people are being hunted by a killer or something. And I watched 30 or 40 minutes of it, and it was just these people yelling and screaming at each other and bickering and everything. And I liked how these four guys interacted with each other. It was a stressful situation, so things got heated a little bit at times, but they were still very respectful of each other. It was funny. They would get mad, and then a few seconds later, it would be like, oh, I'm really sorry that I blew up at you. This is a tough situation or whatever. I just thought it was interesting to see these, pretty tough guys, but actually acting the way real people act,
Right.
Right. I just thought the characters were very well crafted, and I just thought they were I don't know if you know what I mean or not, but a lot of times in
I
movies like
do.
this, you would just have four guys that are just these macho assholes, and they're just,
Right.
the whole time they're just cutting each other down, and it's not really like that. So I liked the portrayal of these characters.
I agree with you 100%. I thought, and I've picked away at other movies in the past for the dialogue or the acting. I thought the acting here was top notch.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever watched Lost,
I did,
but
yeah.
Matthew Fox, it took me, like, I didn't really read the casting prior to watching the movie. I mean, I knew it was Kurt Russell, but I didn't really take note of who else was in it. That's not why I was watching it. And it took me a while to be like, is that Matthew Fox or is it not? I'm like, it's definitely Matthew Fox. And then I was like, well, is it? He's wearing a mustache and he's doing a very, like, he's acting.
He was
doing,
great. I mean, everybody was great.
He was terrific. And I loved it because you take these actors that, at least to me, are recognizable. And sorry, what's the other guy's name? The old guy?
His name's Richard Jenkins.
Richard Jenkins is in. I first time I became aware of Richard Jenkins as an actor was watching 6 Feet Under on HBO decades ago, and he plays the father who's deceased but continues to appear as a ghost. But he's been in everything. I mean, he was in Cabin in the Woods.
He was in Silverado. He was the.
That's right.
He was the Kelly guy, the partner that
right.
Brian Dennehy killed. I mean, he's obviously much, much, much younger, but yeah.
And he's great. He's a terrific actor, character actor. But in this, he gets to play, and he's a terrific comic actor too.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
he usually plays a kind of a hang-dog, maybe a bureaucrat or, henpecked husband, something. Because he's just got these kind of basset hound eyes. But, he's grown. He plays older than I think he is in this movie. He looks older even than Kurt Russell. I think he gets to really develop a character. And it took me a while to, I'm like, is that, that's that, he is great. And it was the voice more than
It took
anything
me a
else.
while to recognize who he was as
The
well.
performances are fantastic. They're just really fantastic. And Kurt Russell, I love. Kurt Russell kind of is the star. So he's, I'm not going to just say he's playing Kurt Russell, but, I think he's just likable. I don't think I've ever seen a role that I didn't just enjoy watching that guy on screen.
But again, he's not the, you could in a different film with a, written a different way and directed a different way, he would have been more of a macho guy, and he just seems like a human being. Okay, spoiler, again, we did a spoiler at the beginning, but Kurt Russell dies at the end and Richard Jenkins lives. And there's this moment where, they both know that Kurt Russell is going to die, and, they have tears in their eyes, and you can see basically the love that these two men have for each other, before they part, knowing that Kurt Russell is going to die. And it's just, you don't see that a lot in these kind of movies. There's another scene where Matthew Fox, where these guys come into their camp one night and steal their horses, and one of his horse gets injured, and he has to go over and shoot the horse, and he says something like, he thanks him for his service or something like that. And I mean, that was a genuinely emotional scene of this guy having to kill his horse that he loves.
We established earlier how much that horse means to him.
Yeah. And again, he's this tough, he's, of the four, he's the closest thing to kind of a bad guy, because, he's killed 120 Indians or whatever and brags about it. But even there's nuance to him,
He dresses like a dandy in this sort of white suit, and he's got this he's clean shaven except for a very groomed mustache, and
he says how he's the smartest man there,
Yeah, and then we think, oh, he's just he's just an a-hole. But we learn through the course of this movie. So it's sort of a road trip movie in the middle, and that these guys get to know each other, and we get to know them. And we get to know his character too, and we discover that the reason he is such a vicious Indian killer is that his mother and his sister, I think he says, for
Yeah.
his wife. But people whom he loves apparently suffered pretty grisly end. He didn't go into detail, but you
Right.
get the sense that he witnessed it, or that he's deeply wounded, and that this veneer is a kind of shell that he has grown around himself. Um, and we do come to see his vulnerability, and it's genuine. I mean, there's a lot in this movie to respect and enjoy, and I think it's not a shame to say that it's so violent, because it is the animal that it is by design, and it's very effective at that. But I found the violence so shocking, like it was just so upsetting, that I think some of that other stuff, which would have made an entertaining enough movie on its own. Like I would have watched a Western without all that violence in it, if it had this kind of depth.
Oh yeah.
Like I just thought it was terrific. And I think, it was, if it didn't, like I could never sit down, and my dad would not be interested in watching this movie.
That's what I thought about as well.
But
Three-fourths.
without
Sorry.
the violence, he would have enjoyed the film, but he would not have enjoyed.
Yeah, 3/4 or so of this movie be like, oh, my dad would love this, and then another 25% of it, he'd just be like, that's one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen.
Why would you? He'd say, why would you show that?
Right.
Why would you? And the answer to that is, at a certain level, the answer to that is because the filmmakers wanted to. Like you said, I want to make a movie where we watch a guy get cut in half and pulled apart before thankfully we don't see them eat him, although one guy does kind of walk in with like a leg or an arm or something and taking a bite of it, but it's not featured the way that the killing is. And but again, I don't want to be too negative about it, because if you're somebody who really loves Westerns and all the good stuff we've been talking about in terms of just a good movie with dialogue and relationships, and you're somebody who likes this genre of horror where it's like, I guess it's body horror. What would you call this when it's this splatter? It's not a slasher movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's just very gory.
But if you're into that, and certainly there's a large audience of people who are, and you're into Westerns, then man, this is your movie.
Oh yeah.
It's just, I think I would say that's a fairly narrow audience, but I mean, I really enjoyed it, and I'm not into the gory stuff. I don't derive any pleasure from it. I don't go, cool. I go, oh God, I'm gonna have to work on forgetting I saw that.
And this isn't like, I'm a big horror fan, but I've never been a lot into the gore stuff. And this is not fun gore, because it's very like something like The Thing, right?
It's not, there's no camp to it at all.
It's very realistic, and yeah, so it, it's pretty stomach churning. Again, like I say, it's not something like an 80s, The Thing or something like that, where it's this obviously, very well done, but obviously fantastical gore scenes that it's like, oh, that's cool, but
that was a thrill ride of a movie. It was
right.
a great horror movie. And it was also disturbing. But yeah, it was a different animal. It was a nightmare put to the screen without forgetting that the movie needs to be entertaining on top of all this, right? It was about selling tickets and giving you a thrill ride you were never going to forget, and making you have nightmares about it, but also walking out of there being like, that was a great movie, And I feel like this one, it's not really fair for me to critique it, because I don't understand the thrill of that. It's got to be catharsis at its root, right? But like, for example, in the beginning, we see that the sheriff is a hard man, and through some people's eyes, like the wife, who's a nurse, he is a brutal man, right? He finds this stranger in town who's acting suspiciously, and he asks him a series of reasonable questions, right? He doesn't like pull his gun on him. He just walks in and says, I'm the sheriff, What's your name? What are you doing here? The guy is clearly lying to him,
Mm-hmm.
right? He is extremely shady and upset and lying to the sheriff. And it sort of escalates. And the sheriff is not a man to mince words. He's like, it seems like you're lying to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it ends up with him shooting the guy in the foot or the shin or something. I don't remember, which seems extreme at the time. Like he seems like he skips a few steps, and then he goes and gets the nurse to, because the doctor of the town is out blind drunk or whatever. And then he gets the nurse to come patch him up, and she admonishes him. And he's kind of like, look, we all know how it's going to unfold by that point, so why waste time, or
Yeah.
something to that effect. It's just basically like, get right to it. So we just go, ooh, this sheriff, he doesn't mess around, he's brutal. And then we put him in a situation where I feel like the filmmakers are like, you want to see brutal? I'll show you brutal. And that's the only sort of thesis I can venture for. Because you could have shot the scene when they go, I'm not trying to make it a different movie than it was, but you could have shot that scene where we don't see it. We could have seen more of the people watching
Mm-hmm.
it happen than it happened itself. The intention of the filmmaker by showing it was to put the audience in Kurt Russell and the other people's shoes as they witnessed the horror of this event. And it's hard to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Hard to watch.
I don't know if there was. I mean, I didn't really do any kind of research or read any interviews with the director, and he was the writer as well, about what kind of point he was trying to make. If you take the cannibals out of it, the very opening scene, and you touched on it, but literally the very first thing that we see on film is David Arquette cutting this guy's throat. And like you said, it appeared that they probably ambushed them in their sleep. And that felt to me a lot like Unforgiven, where Unforgiven, was showing you, okay, it wasn't what we've seen in the movies where, they have the shootout at high noon. It was a lot of criminals were cowardly people who were going to shoot you in the back or cut your throat while you were sleeping. And I think also showing, and this showed as well, the scene that you were talking about where Kurt Russell shoots him in the leg, that it was a dangerous existence. And they obviously, appeared to have this nice little town, these nice homes that they lived in. And I'm sure it was a situation where there were a lot of dangerous people out there, and you had to be kind of hard. You know what I mean? It was kind of like a dog eat dog existence.
Particularly if you were,
you got to kill them before they kill you
for the safety of the town.
Right. Exactly.
You couldn't afford a bunch of like benefit of the doubt baloney.
Yeah.
And I get it, but I would also just say, so Unforgiven was a rough movie that definitely does not glorify violence,
but without the extreme gore of this.
Yes, and it's there in the sound design. So in the beginning, he's cutting a guy's throat, and in some movies that would be a relatively quick draw of the knife across the underside of a guy's jaw, right? And the guy might even go or whatever, and you'd think, damn. But this was like, and you're just like, oh my god,
yeah.
Will you hurry up and cut it? Are you cutting his head off? What are you doing? It's like, it's really, really. This doesn't glorify violence in a way like Rambo does, right? Where there's an exploding arrow and a guy just explode, But it enjoy isn't quite the right. It lingers on it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It kind of lavishes in it
sure.
in a way that can't be designed for the viewer. To me, it's designed to make the viewer squirm.
Yeah.
Because unless you're the kind of person that enjoys that, which is upsetting. So in a way, it sort of does glorify it sort of relishes violence. I mean, what do you think? Is that too strong an accusation to level at this movie?
No, I don't think so. I would agree with that. I just, I wonder if there is any real statement that he was trying to make
I don't think
by
there
this,
really
or is
is.
he just somebody that likes gory films?
No, especially if it's his first movie. He's like, I'm going to make a humdinger.
Yeah.
And I will give it to him. He made a humdinger. I mean, setting the violence aside for a moment, first of all, if you're going to make a horror movie, let's not set it aside for a minute. If you're going to make a horror movie, and I have made one, and it's not that I'm not proud of that effort, but it's hard, man. It's hard to make a movie that isn't just boring. I mean, you go make a movie that is 90 minutes and is not boring, and you have achieved something remarkable. It's hard. If you can make your audience make noise, whether that's laughing or crying out loud or, screeching or groaning, that's a real coup. And this movie, it made you laugh out loud. It made me, groan out loud.
And I don't want to. I don't mean to interrupt, but I don't
I
want
know.
people. I don't
I'm
want
just
people to
used.
think that I was laughing at the guy
You're a
getting
psychopath.
scalped.
I think we
Yeah,
understand.
that was
No,
not
but
funny.
we understand. I'm just saying as a first endeavor, it's a remarkable success, and I think not least of all, the effects and the horror. You do that, and you make someone squirm. Fear and disgust are great big primary emotions, and I would posit that they're almost easier to land with than making someone genuinely care about the people in the movie. And he was extremely successful. I genuinely cared about everyone in this movie.
Me too.
They were fully realized
Except for the
characters,
cavemen. I didn't care about
except for the cavemen, right? And if anything, they were so inhumanly, they were monsters, really. It's like, well, could I make them demons so that they're utterly unworldly? No, they're
At times they
people.
almost reminded me of the Predator when they would do the sound you were, because they would almost like the Predator would. They would kind of arch their back and put their head back, and
Throw their hands
howl.
out.
Yeah.
At their like howling, exactly like a werewolf, but they would be this weird unearthly whistling sound. I mean, I wish that I could make a movie that I thought that was this effective and entertaining. I thought it was really amazing. Just not for all audiences.
Yeah. And I think for me personally, the best movies are the ones that, and it's a real skill to be able to combine, humor, and there are thrilling aspects to it, and there are disturbing aspects and frightening things, and there's also real emotion.
Well, the relationship between the husband and wife too, genuinely passionate, right? And when we first meet them, things are a little strained because he's, had an injury and he's at home all the time, and they're sort of snippy with each other, and that evolves across the course of the film up to the point pretty quickly. There's a scene where they're making love that I thought was really well done. I mean, it was sexy and, but they were connected in a loving way. It was just masterfully done. And then when she's abducted, which happens very early on in the film, and he's like, I got to go after her. You think, oh, but you're in no shape to go after her, but you're like, yeah, you got to go, man. What are you going to you're going to let these, just trust these guys to go save your wife? No, you got to get up there,
And everyone is very human in this. And I think it's a skill that I think a lot of writers do not have. There are movies or shows that you'll watch and there'll be very clever dialogue, but you'll think, oh, this dialogue is really smart or funny or clever, but no one actually speaks this way. This isn't how an actual human would have a conversation with someone. Right. And, they say some witty things and use some big words that maybe, I don't know if somebody in the Old West would have used or not, but they never seem anything other than real three-dimensional people, I felt.
And it doesn't feel contemporary.
No.
Sometimes in Silverado, I was like, sometimes with Kevin Kline's performance or Brian Dennehy's performance, there was a contemporariness to it, even though they weren't talking about cell phones and saying "dude." There was just something that felt contemporary in their banter, and not so here. It felt very true to the period.
And I don't know how accurate this was, but I thought it was very interesting how formal they were. Even there are these guys out camping essentially, but I don't know. Just again, coming back to how apologetic they were when they would get angry with each other, and Kurt Russell always refers to the guy's wife as I think Dowler was their last name, and he never refers to her as anything other than Mrs. Dowler, and not her whatever her first name is, and I just thought it was an interesting. I don't know if that's accurate to how people acted in this time frame, but I just thought it was interesting how formal everyone was.
And there is a little, I almost forgot about this, but right when they're getting started, there's this, the wife is, she's very beautiful. And there's a little bit of tension between the husband and the Matthew Fox character, because he is also a young, handsome man. And, he's clearly noticed how beautiful she is. And there isn't like nothing crazy happens, but there's a little bit of like, hey, stay away from my girl tension. And part of him wanting to go is like, if he's going, I'm going, and all that felt very real and formal in a Western way too.
Yeah.
Like he wasn't like shouldering up to the bar and hitting on her, and it was something just in the way he was taking her in. He wasn't even like leering at her or anything, but clearly observing how beautiful she was. That was palpable, and the other guy was bristling at that. Just don't look at my wife that way.
And there was some kind of history with that, because he said something along the lines of he says something about not hitting on her or whatever, and he says something like, oh well, I haven't done that for years or something, so
I was terrified that they were going to eat her.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh, I can't watch that.
Yeah, that was one thing that I was relieved that they stayed away from, that if the cavemen had done anything horrible to her, we didn't see it. That would have been, if they had shown them attacking her or something, that would have been just too much, I think.
Yeah, it was it was almost too much as it was.
Yeah, for sure. Now, have you seen any of this guy has directed 2 other movies? Have you seen either of them? One is called Brawl in Cell Block 99 that stars Vince Vaughn. Nope. As this again, it's another. I've not seen it, but it's another one. What I've read about it, he's a guy who's in prison, so he has to be very violent to, kind of get his way out. I do not enjoy prison stuff. Freaks me out. I don't really, aside from some of the greats like Shawshank Redemption. I just prison stuff to me is terrifying. So I don't know if I would ever watch this one, but it came out in 2017 and got a lot of acclaim. And then there is another, he did a 2018 movie called Dragged Across Concrete that has Vince Vaughn and Mel Gibson in it. And it's these, I guess, like kind of dirty cops. And it is another one from what I've read. This seems to be the kind of the way this guy works is it's supposed to be just super, super extremely violent. So I don't know.
I have not seen either.
Yeah.
Although based on his work, I mean, I don't relish the violence either, but everything else in this movie is so well done that I'm tempted to check it out.
Yeah. And, I know I said last week that I'm not much of a, I'm not the world's biggest Western fan, but I would love to see this guy do another Western.
Yeah. I am. I love a Western. I mean, there's a good movie's a good movie and a bad movie's a bad movie, but there's just something about the period that I think is so much fun.
Yeah, and I, there's not a lot of them, but um, I think a mashup of Western and horror works really well. I think I never watched the movie because everything that I uh, read about it said that it was terrible. But I used to read the comics some when I was a kid, and I think maybe you did too. But Jonah Hex, where that was like a Western with a supernatural element to it, I think.
Right.
And it's a shame that didn't do kind of justice to the comic from what I understand, because I think that's a cool genre, a mashup of Western and horror, or Western with supernatural stuff in it.
Sure,
I think it goes
in the right
together well.
hands. Yeah, in the right hands. For some reason, if we're down that vein, he's like a demon, right? He's sort of Ghost Rider, but right, he's
I
back from
think
the
so,
dead or
yeah.
back from hell or something on a
Something
mission.
like
He's
that, yeah.
ultimately a good guy, but he's trying to redeem his soul or something.
Yeah, I'm sure we're butchering that, and somebody out there knows the
Sure.
character really well.
Apologies.
It's yelling at us, but yeah, it's something like that, I think.
But I think if I was going to make a horror movie Western, it would be ghosts
Yeah.
somehow. It'd be a ghost story. I feel like you might even be able to do a zombie Western. That might be really interesting if you didn't make it. If you made it a small thing like this, that and you stayed with it, instead of episode 1 being like how we got to the apocalypse, and then the rest of it being what do we do now that we're in the apocalypse. But if you stayed the whole episode with like the first zombie coming up, and then by the end, the finale is our heroes basically trying to get out of town, that has more or less, to tip pretty quickly near the end of Act 2. And then you've got, people we've seen in life earlier in the movie are now all zombies. And then there's that sort of swarm scene where you got to try and get out of town. That could
cool.
work.
I'm certain there are zombie Westerns because there's zombie everything,
Yeah. I don't know. I think it would sort of fit with the production design.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one thing with this, there's never any, I think maybe in a little more modern setting, there would be somewhere in there the conversation of, they have I forget what they call him, the philosopher or the historian or something like that. But there's a, Native American Indian guy in the town who they bring in to be like, who are these people? And he's like, they're troglodytes. And he says, to you, they're just going to look like any other Indian, but they're,
right.
They're cave dwellers or whatever. And that's
the only bit of dialogue that's a little, and it's done well in the movie, but it's a little, he's expositional, like, he's like, it's a corrupt bloodline, he has this whole monologue that sort of sets these, enemies up.
You're right.
That's the only thing that feels a little, scripty or contrived.
Yeah. But I think maybe compared to something that was modern day, I think even though these characters are very modern in a lot of ways, I think there's a somewhat of a separation from modernity that there would be if this was a movie that took place in 2020, because I think it was interesting that they don't question that these people could exist. It's just like, okay, they're cavemen, because I think there were probably still in the Old West, you still had people that had superstitions and
Sure.
things like that. You know what I mean? I
well,
thought it was.
Yeah, if we were going to do a zombie Western, we'd say, well, what are the zombies? Well, they're probably not viral zombies. They're probably, I mean, just to pick at cliches, it'd be some sort of, medicine magic, or it would be Christian magic. You know,
Yeah.
there'd be some sort of a curse. Bandits come in and they murder the people in the church, and there's a curse that gets. You know, it would be religion oriented. Although, you know, some of my favorite zombie movies are the ones that just don't explain it. They're like, well, why are the dead rising? Like, forget it. Who cares? That's not the point.
Yeah. And I thought that was a great aspect of this. We didn't need any backstory on the troglodytes. It's just like, hey, there's troglodytes and they live in the caves and they're bad and they abduct people and we got to go kill them, you know?
Yeah. They got my wife and they're not giving her back.
Another thing with this, I'm not going to lie. I started watching this. It was probably close to 10 p.m. last night. And I looked at and again, you know, this turned out to be different than what I thought it was. I thought it would be a super slow burn, and I thought it would be very depressing all the way through, and it's not. But I turned it on and I thought 2 hours and 12 minutes. I don't know if, you know, I'm going to have a hard time staying awake for this. And I was riveted the whole time. I mean, from the opening scene, I just felt like, wow, this is a great, great movie.
Yeah, I agree. It didn't feel like 2 hours and 12
No,
minutes.
it
you know, even though it literally plods, like even though for the second half of Act 2 they are walking through deserty hill country.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel like a slog.
No, it's always interesting. And you know, it was funny. I was thinking last night, you know, last week when we talked about Silverado, you were saying how great it would be to do a Western. And I was thinking, I don't think I would have wanted to have had Patrick Wilson's role in this, having to limp and crawl, and, you know, not like he literally was walking miles across the desert or whatever, but I just thought, I don't know if that would be much fun, you know, faking a limp and crawling around on the ground.
It was convincing. It was a convincing performance.
Yeah.
Cool. So we're getting towards time here, and I want to spend a little time talking about what we're going to do next week. But I mean, I think without having to be formal about it, we would both recommend this movie.
Absolutely, yeah.
And again, I've said it probably 5 times now. The only caveat I would offer you is that if you had no stomach for graphic violence, this may not be.
Yeah, definitely. And at this point, after, you know, we've described scalpings and cutting a guy in two and all that, it's
that's the big one. But there's a tone of violence throughout, and there are little episodes throughout that sort of pop up on you.
I was telling my brother-in-law about this today, and I said, you know, I was watching it and I thought, my sister is a horror fan, but is not into gore. And I thought, oh, she would, again, about 3/4 of this movie she would really like, and then the rest, not so much.
It's, you know what it is? It's like you said about The Thing. It's that it strives for such realism, right? It's not Freddy Krueger. It's not, you know, an alien locked in the ice that turns all Cronenberg tentacly. You know, it's really, you can imagine that if somebody split a guy down the middle, that this is kind of what it would look like. And it's so upsetting.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you get to, you know, you see in the course of that scene, you see the guy as a person earnestly trying to get his friend to convey, you know, tell my mom that I loved her, right?
Yeah.
Because he's aware they're going to kill him, and he's witnessed them doing it to somebody else. And then we watch him go through the process of them killing him, which doesn't take a long time, but it's not like a shot to the back of the head. Mm-mm. They butcher him alive, and it's just, wow, so upsetting.
Did you feel watching this? There were times in this where I thought, oh, this is just going to be one of these downer ending movies where they just all die. Did you think they were going to make it out, or did you?
I was never sure, and I think that is a success of the film,
because they kept getting hit in the head and dragged around, and I thought, these guys aren't going to live.
Well, and Kurt Russell doesn't make it.
No, he doesn't
Right?
make
I
it.
mean, so he's the sort of proxy for, oh God, nobody's going to make it out alive. But the husband and wife make it out, and the old man make it out.
Mhm.
And Kurt Russell sort of stays behind to kill off the last few guys, and we don't get perfect confirmation that he does, except it ends with these sort of 3 gunshots.
Yeah.
And clearly the old man takes that as he got him, right? He's like, there's no way I can get back to town. He's been shot, and the big one was sort of working on him for a while. And he's been shot and cut open, and he's in bad shape. And it's just, he's not going to make up. They don't have horses,
Mhm.
It's a 5-day ride. So it's even longer than that to walk. There's just no way. And he says, I'm going to stay here and make sure, because the other ones will track us back. If it will track you back if I don't take care of them. So the implication is that he stays behind to kill the remaining 3 troglodytes,
Mhm.
and does. But I guess we leave a hanging thread there. So it's a bit of both. It's a bit of the happy ending. The two people you care the most about probably are the husband and wife get out,
Mhm.
and nobody else. But I did worry. I was like, oh man. Was never like, oh God, this is one of those movies. It was, oh God, I hope this isn't one of those.
Yeah,
movies. And then
I was unsure.
I was glad when it wasn't.
Yeah.
So that's the success of the film, because I cared.
And it was upsetting when Kurt Russell dies. Very upsetting.
Yeah, I think if I had been certain it was going to go that direction, I would have finished watching it, because we would have had to talk about it here on the podcast. But just as a casual viewer, I probably would have turned it off. If 20 minutes before the end, I was certain that it was just going to, I would have been like, I can't. I don't want to watch that. But it didn't. It kept me engaged the whole way through. So if you can stomach the violence that I think we've painted pretty clearly, I think you're going to.
Some people may have to look through their fingers, at some scenes or something, but because it's rough for sure.
It makes me think of it's a very different movie, but it makes me think of the movie Hostiles with Christian Bale in it, because it nails the period so well, and it nails relationships. There's one scene in which Christian Bale is talking to a friend of his who is dying, and they're alone in a hospital room. The guy's in a hospital bed, and Christian Bale is basically telling the guy that he loves him, that it's been this honor and privilege to ride with him as a compatriot. And you can see, Christian Bale's a good actor. You can see how much it means to both of them. And you can also see that in this time period, men did not cry. So both of them are fighting with all of their wills to just, they're staring at each other with this incredible intensity, both of them willing themselves not to weep uncontrollably. They're in an empty room. There are no witnesses. One of them is going to die soon, right? What would it, but it just, it's such a great depiction of the time of, like, it's womanly or whatever, men do not cry. And I am not going to do my dear friend here, who I love, who is dying, the dishonor of crying in his presence. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
It's a great scene. And it's it's about a guy who is an Indian hater and is charged with sort of conveying this prominent Native American chief from here to there, and across the course of the thing, he comes to have not a change of heart, makes it sound trite, but he comes to an understanding and a respect for the guy, and a deeper awareness of himself. And it's not a perfect movie, and I haven't seen it in a while. I haven't seen it in a few years, but if you're sort of re-interested in Westerns, I think there's some violence in that I think is done really well, but it's not, it's like shootouts and stuff. But they're done very well. They don't feel choreographed. It's not like, oh, there's a guy on the roof, bang, oh, he fell into the water bucket. It's the guns come out, and then the shooting starts unpredictably, and it's kind of chaos. And of course it's choreographed, because it's a film. You've got to choreograph it so you know where to shoot what you're shooting, camera wise. But the feeling of it is extremely kinetic. And you think, man, the guys that survive a lot of gunfights, luck is just a huge factor of it.
Sure.
It's not like you're Clint Eastwood and you're just Deadeye Jones and you're, it's you just happen not to get shot randomly by any number of the many people shooting each other.
Right.
Which I think is pretty rare in Westerns. There's the glamorous, showdown type stuff.
Sure.
But this idea that when things went south and people started pulling their triggers, there was no strategy,
Oh yeah.
I think you would dig that one. If you wanted to, we could talk about that one of these days. Whether we want to do 3 Westerns in a row, I don't know.
We could watch it sometime.
What are you thinking? So we're about at time. What are you thinking for next week?
So, well, I'll give you 2 suggestions that are couldn't be more different from each other. I think, and then if you have some ideas, if there's some things that you want to watch, we'll talk about those. There is a 2020 movie so basically these are 2 movies that I'm probably going to watch whether we watch them for the show or not. One is, we talked about Cronenberg again a little bit in this episode. His son is a director. And I've not seen any of his movies, but he has a 2020 movie called Possessor, which is a science fiction film. I don't know what it's about from watching the trailer, but it looks really interesting. So that's one that if you would want to watch the trailer, check it out, see if you think it's something you might want to watch. And then the other one, I don't know if you've ever seen this before, and this randomly popped into my head, and I looked it up on Prime, and it's on there. A movie from 1981 called Kill and Kill Again. It's a martial arts movie, and it was one that I watched when I was like 8 years old, and I thought was super cool at the time, and I'm sure it's horrible, but it's been remastered at some point because the trailer, like the quality of the of the picture looks fantastic.
What's it called?
It's called Kill and Kill Again. It's a martial arts movie. I think most of the people in it are American though, or European or something. It's not it's like a modern day 1980s martial arts movie, but it's either going to be one of those ones where it will be so bad it's good, or it's just really bad.
It's so bad it's bad.
So bad it's bad, yeah. But
man, I could go either way because I just Googled them up here, and Kill and Kill Again looks like it might be so bad it's good.
This is one that I watched on that was on HBO when I was a kid, and I watched it a bunch of times. And it also got me thinking, I don't know if you'll remember this, and I may have brought this up on another episode of the podcast, I don't know. But there was a time when we were kids, I was at your house, and do you remember when there was a period there for a year or two where ninjas were like this huge thing? All kids were into ninjas.
Yep.
And there was a movie called it was I'm sure they took the title because it was around the time of Return of the Jedi, but this was either called Return of the Ninja or Revenge of the Ninja, and it's an American guy who's a ninja. And I remember we were going to watch it, and we must have talked about it or something, and your mom caught wind of it, and I don't know if she had seen some of the movie or what, but she was just like, that's a horrible movie to watch or whatever, and we kind of snuck and watched it without her knowing.
I don't remember
but
that.
She was upset. I don't know if she ever found out that we watched it or not, but she was just like, that's not something that people should watch because it's a really disgusting movie. But we snuck and watched it on HBO or Cinemax or something like that.
I don't remember that. It's
yeah,
so funny.
That's very clear in my mind for some reason, but
I think those are 2 really good candidates, and I can't decide, so I'm going to let you pick. What are we watching for next week? Kill and Kill Again or Possessor?
Let's go with Possessor.
Okay.
Because I think it's actually going to be good, and then maybe the next time we can watch that.
It says it's got a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah,
that's pretty good sign.
I don't know what
Sean Bean is in it. That's a pretty good sign.
It's I don't know what Cronenberg's son's movies are like. I know they're weird. but I haven't seen any of them. So and like you could watch the trailer and maybe if you don't want to watch it, we could watch the other one. But it looks intriguing from the trailer.
Awesome.
It's supposed to be sci-fi. I don't know if it's sci-fi horror or
It says horror, sci-fi, but
Okay.
I think that it's within our wheelhouse. And
Sure.
it's not an old movie from our youth. It's a new movie that neither of us have seen
Exactly.
yet. So,
Yeah.
For next week, we're going to watch Possessor by Mr. Cronenberg Jr. And if you have feedback, thoughts, requests, it's chrisandchristalkmovies@gmail.com. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we will talk to you next week.